Hi there, I'm Tim Autrey, and welcome to Principle-Based Performance Improvement, where we combine timeless wisdom with modern science and practical tools to help you move yourself and your organization toward better, safer, and more productive outcomes.
Welcome to the final episode of Module 7. Now, think about this. We have spent a lot of time building up the underlying psychology. We've talked about how to reach in and grab people, and it's much more powerful to do it from a heartfelt level versus just cognitive level. How to be an influencer, the 3 hats of influence. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you the simple recipe for how to do it. So now we're finally going to dive into the CORE-4. You have your handy-dandy little principle-based mentoring notebook or any kind of a notebook or something to take notes on. You could be using a tablet, you could be using a phone, whatever. So you're keeping notes. The evolution gets finished, and it's time now for you to engage with this individual you've been watching and provide them with feedback. So what you do is before you open your mouth, you go through and you identify the top 3 positive things that you saw them do. Oh my goodness, this is a major shift from the old way of doing things, isn't it? So you've already pre-identified the top 3 things they did. So the whole conversation starts like this. Let's go back to Joe. Let's say this was Joe doing this job again. You say, Joe, I loved the way you did that. I was really impressed with how that other thing turned out because you did this, and I've never seen anybody do that like that before. That was fantastic. Now, the whole thing has been positive. Once you do that, then you ask Joe a simple question. What else did you do well? Oh my goodness. Is this positive or negative? Once again, it's positive. What else did you do well? They start saying negative stuff, you stop them and say, no, that's not what I asked you. What else did you do well? Then you give them time to think of everything that they can think of. All right? Now, the whole conversation so far has been what? Positive. Fantastic. So now we go down to part 2, and it's the next share. So now you have taken notes, and you've got, in your little notebook, you've got a whole bunch of notes in here. So then you go through, you'd already identified your top 3, and if you're like a lot of mentors do, you'll have maybe a multicolored pen, or what I've always done is I put a little plus up arrow, down arrow, or sideways arrow along the left-hand side of this thing, and then whatever my comment is. So what I would have done, I would have gone through and I'd have identified my top 3 up arrows. And then, after Joe comes up with everything he could think of that he did well, you go down through your list, and everything that he missed, you tell him. This is the pivot point. So now we've shared our top 3 positives. We've asked, okay, what else did you do well? We've shared any additional positives. Positive, positive, positive. Now look at this. Now we're asking a question. And we're going to ask a question relative to something we spent a lot of time talking about already, this whole organizational entropy. Drift in perception of risk, drift in how work's actually being done around here, accumulation of landmines and roadblocks. So the pivot question is, what could have gone better? So our whole conversation down here has been positive until we get down here. And I want you to fully recognize a couple pieces of psychology here. We have not started out by telling them what could have been done better. Point number 1. Point number 2, I want you to check out the difference in wording between this ask and the first ask. And I'm going to give you just a moment to look at the difference in wording there. If you're a brainiac, like I know you are, you've already figured this out. In this first ask, this is intentionally personalized. What else did you do well? In the second ask, it is intentionally depersonalized. We're not saying, what could you have done better? This is depersonalized. What could have gone better? Chances are really good that 90% of the things that could have gone better have something to do with process, programmatic, and organizational issues. The whole thing that we get back to precept number 2, the whole concept of drift and accumulation. Most of the stuff that could have gone better is going to be associated with that. We want this individual, in our little example case here, Joe, to tell us what could have gone better that he's aware of. There's another reason why you want to make darn sure you depersonalize this. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase before, but you know, there used to be, maybe back in the 70s, there used to be, if you were going to give somebody some negative feedback, you'd do what was called the sandwich technique. You'd tell them something positive, layer in something negative, and finish up with something positive. That is garbage because you're just confusing the heck out of an individual. Let's say you compliment somebody on their hair and then you say, but overall you look frumpy today. Which one is the individual going to pay more attention to? Obviously the negative. Our brains are wired from the most primitive stage all the way back to the lizard brain, more wired to pay more attention to negative stuff. There's a phrase that I love too that you want to have in your back pocket and start paying attention with the words that come out of your mouth as well as the words that other people are speaking. And the phrase is this: everything before the but is a lie. So if you say something positive and you say but, yada, 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 it means you didn't even really mean that first part. At least that is what the other person perceives. You didn't even really mean the first part. So you don't want to do that. So if we were to ask the question this way, what else did you do well? Oh, we're all having a great time. And then you come down here and say, well, what could you have done better? Well, that's the but. And it would negate everything that you've talked about here. And like I already said, most of the stuff that's going to come out here from Joe is, well, you know, the tools weren't available and it took us, we were an hour and a half late getting started on this job. I'm standing at the darn materials window because the guy couldn't find the stuff and yada, 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 yada. You know what I'm talking about. Those kind of things exist everywhere. So that's your ask. What you do then is you share. So now remember, you've got your notes, right? You got them all written down in here, and you've got your up arrows, your side arrows, your down arrows. If you want to get really fancy, you can do diagonal down arrows, diagonal up arrows for things that aren't quite as positive, however you want to do it. That's how I do it. Anyway, so you go down through your list, and you may have noticed some stuff that Joe didn't notice, or you may have noticed some stuff, maybe Joe noticed it, but he didn't mention it. You want to list every single thing that Joe didn't mention that did not meet expectations in the essence of drift or challenges associated with accumulation or whatever it is, process, programmatic, organizational stuff. Why do you want to do that? Let's go back to key insight number 28. What you allow, you teach. So if Joe did something in violation of procedure, and we've already talked about why people violate procedures, you're watching him, you don't say anything about it, you've just taught Joe that that's okay. You are reinforcing procedure violation. If Joe did something unsafe and you didn't say anything about it, you have just reinforced that cutting corners or doing unsafe acts are okay. And by the way, before we go any further with that one, in the middle of an observation or walking through a facility or whatever, if you ever see anything where people are doing something that's really unsafe, you don't want to wait until after the fact to give them the feedback. If it's truly unsafe, you should stop them right at that moment and get that corrected to make darn sure nobody gets hurt. All right, so now you've shared any other drift or challenges, and this brings us back to a review of something we talked about in Module 2. Remember those 4 powerful words? These are tools I recommended you have in your back pocket that are incredibly powerful for you to use as a leader and influencer. You remember what they were? It's asking someone, what do you think? 4 incredibly powerful words. What do you think? So when we get back to the CORE-4 now, this is what we're going to ask. How do you think all the stuff we just talked about can be corrected? And they're here 4 words essentially. What do you think? What do you think we should do about this? What do you think we can do to get this fixed? Don't take that away from them. Let them have the opportunity to answer in this capacity because it gives them an opportunity to make a difference, to make a contribution. And if you remember the whole continuum of purpose, autonomy, mastery, purpose, autonomy, mastery, combined with the intrinsic need of human beings to feel like, you know, our time on this planet means something, that's what you're creating right here. Well, what do you think? Tell me how you think we can fix this. We continue on down through the CORE-4 process with our next share. So now, from your perspective as a leader, as an influencer, maybe back in the day you did this very job, maybe not. Maybe you're the engineering director, remember, and this is an operator, you've never actually done that, but you can think back into your early engineering days when you've faced some similar problem or you're aware of something else that's going on right now somewhere else in the facility. You want to share your personal insights about whatever those things are and how we can make them better together. The final ask is, how can I help make your job easier? Now, here's the one more cap off on this, and I want to go back to the example of engineering director and Joe the operator. So let's go back to that example that I was talking about where Joe said, you know, the reason that I almost got my hand on that wrong switch was because if you look at the human factors, it looks exactly like the switch next to it. And when you look at the labeling on there, the labeling is almost identical. And if you get your hand on the wrong switch in that situation, you're going to have, you know, it's going to cause something really bad to happen. And operations, we've been talking about this for a long time. Everybody knows about this, but I know there are other folks that have almost done that as well. And we've always been told it's an engineering problem. Well, now you're the engineering director. So here's the way you'd want to handle that. You'd want to say to Joe, all right, Joe, here's the thing, you know, we're engineers, you guys are operators, so what I would love for you to do is to tell me, and if time allows, he can tell you right then and there, maybe you can draw it out, maybe he needs to send you an email. Let's say that it's a little more extensive. So, Joe, what I would love for you to do before you go home today, because I think this is really important, before you go home today, if you could please take a few minutes and put in an email how you think we can fix this. What do you think? How you think we can fix this, and send it to me, and I'll make sure it gets pushed through the channels, and we're going to get this taken care of. So now Joe is like, oh, all right. So maybe he has to stay a few minutes late, but he jots down the email. Maybe he talks to a couple of his operator buddies. Hey, you know, I talked to the Dawn over there, the the director of engineering, and she said, if I send her information, they're going to get that darn thing fixed. What do you think we should do? So they hash it out. Joe writes an email, sends it to Dawn. Later on, of course, usually as leaders, we work later than, you know, operators are typically shift workers. They turn over, they go home. We're still there. The email comes in. You immediately send it through the channels, and son of a gun, within a week, Joe's recommendations have been implemented, and the operators see that. Now, I want to ask you a question. Number one, if you are Dawn in that little scenario, what has that done to your relationship with Joe? Oh my gosh. Joe thinks you are probably the best senior leader in the entire organization now. What has this done for Joe's sense of making a difference? He actually took a little bit of effort, made a connection, and a problem that's been facing operators for a long, long time has gotten fixed. Joe feels great about Joe. A legitimate landmine has gone away. Our relationship has been greatly enhanced. And now, it's only one data point, but we have one team, one goal, one conversation going on between ops and engineering. You see how all this works? This isn't rocket science. And when you use this simple little recipe right here, oh my gosh, this is fantastically powerful, providing you do the last part of the engagement process, which is follow through. And that's what I just talked about. You need to follow through when there are things relative to whatever process, programmatic, organizational issues, traps, roadblocks, landmines that an individual can't fix by themselves. You were doing an observation. Man, whatever you can do to help get that fixed, that little scenario plays out. Now think about this. Overall and over time, that scenario is playing out over and over and over between people that are providing feedback and people that are receiving feedback. And this can go in all directions, by the way. And you should have an open enough environment so that if I'm sitting in a meeting with my boss and my boss's boss, in the appropriate professional way, I ought to be able to say something that needs to be said. And it should be safe to do that. And when it needs to be said and I said it, I should be appreciated for saying that.
If you're finding these insights helpful, please share them with your friends and colleagues. Help your search engine find more content like this for you by hitting the like button before you leave And if these PPI messages resonate with you, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, my friend, be safe, stay humble, and make a difference.